Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sati Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. It's the time for Krishna book, and this is summary study of the 10th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. And this is chapter 32, and this is part 5. It's a long chapter, and it is the prayers of the Personified Vedas. And this is Sanatan Kumara speaking, I believe. One of the 4 Kumara brothers, sons of Lord Brahma. The individual soul, beginning from Lord Brahma down to the ant, exhibits his spiritual potency according to his present body. The demigods are in the same category with the individual souls in the bodies of the human beings or in the bodies of lower animals. Intelligent persons, therefore, do not worship different demigods who are simply infinitesimal representatives of Krishna, manifesting in conditioned bodies. The individual soul can exhibit his power and potencies only in proportion to the shape and constitution of the body. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, can exhibit his full potencies in any shape or form without any change. The Mayavadi philosopher's thesis that God and the individual soul are one and the same cannot be accepted, because the individual soul has to develop his power and potencies according to the development of different types of bodies. The individual soul in the body of a baby cannot show the full power and potency of a grown man, but Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, even when lying on the lap of his mother as a baby, could exhibit his full potency and power by killing Putana and other demons who tried to attack him. Therefore, the spiritual potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is said to be ekaras, without change. Therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the only worshipful object, and this is perfectly known to persons who are uncontaminated by the force of material nature. In other words, only liberated souls can worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Less intelligent Mayavadis take to the worship of demigods, thinking that the demigods and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are on the same level. The Personified Vedas continued to offer their obeisances. Dear Lord, they prayed, after many, many births, those who have actually become wise take to the worship of your lotus feet in complete knowledge. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad-gītā, wherein the Lord says that after many, many births, a great soul or Mahatma surrenders unto the Lord, knowing well that Vasudeva, Krishna, is the cause of all causes. The Vedas continued, as has already been explained, since our mind, intelligence, and senses have been given to us by God, when these instruments are actually purified, there's no alternative but to engage them all in the devotional service of the Lord. A living entity's entrapment in different species of life is due to the misapplication of the mind, intelligence, and senses in material activities. Various kinds of bodies are awarded as the result of a living entity's actions, and they are created by the material nature according to the living entity's desire. Because the living entity desires and deserves a particular kind of body, it is given to him by the material nature under the order of the Supreme Lord. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, it is explained that under the control of superior authority, a living entity is put within the semen of a male and injected into the womb of a particular female in order to develop a particular type of body. A living entity utilizes his senses, intelligence, mind, etc. in a specific way of his own choosing, and thus develops a particular type of body within which he becomes encaged. In this way, the living entity becomes situated in different species of life, either in demigod, human, animal body, according to different situations and circumstances. It is explained in the Vedic literatures that the living entities entrapped in different species of life are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The Mayavadi philosophers mistake the living entity for the Paramatma, who's actually sitting with the living entity as a friend. Because the Paramatma, the localized aspect of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the individual living entity are both within the body, a misunderstanding sometimes takes place that there's no difference between the two. But there is a definite difference between the individual soul and the supersoul, and it is explained in the Varaha Purana as follows. The Supreme Lord has two different kinds of parts and parcels. The living entity is called Vibhanamsa, and the Paramatma, or the plenary expansion of the Supreme Lord, is called Svamsa. The Swamsa plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is as powerful as the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. There is not even the slightest difference between the potency of the Supreme Person and that of his plenary expansion as Paramatma. But the Vibhanamsa parts and parcels possess only a minute portion of the potencies of the Lord. The Narayan Pancharatra states that the living entities who are the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord are undoubtedly of the same quality of spiritual existence as the Lord himself, but they're prone to be tinged with the material qualities. Because he is prone to be subjected to the influence of the material qualities, the minute living entity is called Jiva. Sometimes the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also known as Shiva, the all-auspicious. So the difference between Shiva and Jiva is that the all-auspicious Personality of Godhead is never affected by material qualities, whereas the minute portions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are prone to be affected by the qualities of material nature. Supersoul within the body of a particular living entity, although a plenary portion of the Lord, is worshipable by the individual living entity. Great sages have therefore concluded that the process of meditation is designed so that the individual living entity may concentrate his attention on the lotus feet of the supersoul form, Vishnu. That is the real form of samadhi. A living entity cannot become liberated from material entanglement by his own effort. He must therefore take to the devotional service of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord or the supersoul within himself. Sridhar Swami, the great commentator on Srimad Bhagavatam, has composed a nice verse in this regard, the purport of which is as follows. My dear Lord, I'm eternally part and parcel, but I have been entrapped by the material potencies, which are also an emanation from you. As the cause of all causes, you've entered my body as the supersoul, and I have the prerogative to enjoy the supreme blissful life of knowledge along with you. Therefore, my dear Lord, please order me to render you loving service so that I can again be brought to my original position of transcendental bliss. Great personalities understand that a living entity entangled in this material world cannot become freed by his own efforts. With firm faith and devotion, such great personalities engage themselves in rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord. That's the verdict of the personified Vedas. The personified Vedas continued. Dear Lord, it's very difficult to achieve perfect knowledge of the Absolute Truth. Your Lordship is so kind to the fallen souls that you appear in different incarnations and execute different activities. You appear even as an historical personality of this material world. Your pastimes are very nicely described in the Vedic literatures. Such pastimes are as attractive as the ocean of transcendental bliss. People in general have a natural inclination to read narrations in which ordinary jivas are glorified. But when they become attracted by the Vedic literatures which delineate your eternal pastimes, they actually dip into the ocean of transcendental bliss. As a fatigued man feels refreshed by dipping into a reservoir of water, so the conditioned soul, who is very much disgusted with material activities, becomes refreshed and forgets all the fatigue of material activities simply by dipping into the transcendental ocean of your pastimes. And eventually, he merges in the ocean of transcendental bliss. The most intelligent devotees, therefore, do not take to any means of self-realization except devotional service and constant engagement in the 9 different processes of devotional service, especially hearing and chanting. When hearing and chanting about your transcendental pastimes, the devotees do not care even for the transcendental bliss derived from liberation or from merging into the existence of the Supreme. Such devotees are not interested in even so-called liberation. Certainly they have no interest in material activities for elevation to the heavenly planets, for sense gratification. Pure devotees seek only the association of Paramahamsas, or great liberated devotees, so that they can continually hear and chant about your glories. For this purpose, the pure devotees are prepared to sacrifice all comforts of life, even giving up the material comforts of family life and so-called society, friendship, and love. Those who have tasted the nectar of devotion by relishing the transcendental vibration of chanting your glories, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, do not care for any other spiritual bliss or for material comforts, which appear to the pure devotee to be less important than the straw in the street. Personified Vedas continue. Dear Lord, when a person is able to purify his mind, senses, and intelligence by engaging himself in devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, his mind becomes his friend. Otherwise, his mind is always his enemy. When the mind is engaged in devotional service of the Lord, it becomes the intimate friend of the living entity, because the mind can then think of the Supreme Lord always. Your Lordship is eternally dear to the living entity, so when the mind is engaged in thought of you, one immediately feels the great satisfaction for which he's been hankering life after life. When one's mind is thus fixed on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one does not take to any kind of inferior worship or inferior process of self-realization. By attempting to worship a demigod, or by taking to any other process of self-realization, the living entity becomes a victim of the cycle of birth and death. No one can estimate how much the living entity becomes degraded by entering abominable species of life, such as cats and dogs. Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung that persons who do not take to devotional service of the Lord, but are attracted to the process of philosophical speculation and fruitive activities, drink the poisonous results of such actions. Such persons are forced to take birth in different species of life and are forced to adopt obnoxious practices like meat eating and intoxication. Materialistic persons generally worship the transient material body and forget the welfare of the spirit soul within the body. Some take shelter of materialistic science to improve bodily comforts, and some take to the worship of demigods in order to be promoted to the heavenly planets. Their goal in life is to make the material body comfortable, while forgetting the interest of the spirit soul. Such persons are described in Vedic literature as suicidal, because attachment for the material body and its comforts forces the living entity to wander through the process of birth and death perpetually and suffer the material pangs as a matter of course. The human form of life is a chance for one to understand his position, and the most intelligent person takes to devotional service just to engage his mind, senses, and body in the service of the Lord without deviation.